There is a moment coming in your life. You don't know when. You don't know what shape it will take. But it is coming, and I want you to sit with that for a second instead of flinching away from it like you usually do. It might be a diagnosis. It might be a phone call at 2 a.m. It might be the day someone you built your entire identity around decides they don't want you anymore. It might be the failure of something you poured 5 years of your life into. You don't know what it is yet, but somewhere down the road, life is going to test you in a way that nothing has tested you before. And here is the terrifying part. Most people are not ready for it, not because they are weak, not because they are broken, but because nobody ever taught them how to prepare for a storm they couldn't see coming. They spent their whole life building a career, building a body, building a bank account, building a reputation, and they forgot to build the one thing that actually determines whether any of that survives contact with real adversity. They forgot to build their mind. I want you to think about something most people never think about. We spend years in school learning mathematics we will never use again. We spend thousands of hours learning to drive, to cook, to use software, to speak another language. But almost nobody spends even a single hour deliberately training the one skill that decides whether they crumble or rise when life turns against them. That skill is mental toughness. And the reason this matters so much right now in this exact moment of your life is because you cannot build it after the storm hits. You can only build it before. Think about that phrase for a second. Before life breaks you. Not if. Before, because life breaks everyone eventually. The only question that matters is what's left standing when it does. There's an old idea dating back thousands of years, found in Stoic philosophy, that the wood a tree grows in a sheltered greenhouse will never be as strong as the wood grown in open wind. The tree that gets shaken by storms year after year develops deeper roots and denser fiber. The tree that never faces resistance grows tall, yes, but hollow. And the moment real wind comes, it doesn't bend, it snaps. Most people today are growing in the greenhouse. Comfortable jobs, comfortable routines, comfortable relationships, endless entertainment a few taps away, dopamine on demand, validation on demand, comfort on demand. And I'm not here to shame comfort. Comfort isn't the enemy. The problem is what comfort does to the mind when it becomes the only environment you ever know. It quietly, invisibly erodes your capacity to handle friction. And you don't notice this erosion happening. You only discover it the day friction finally arrives, uninvited, and you realize you have no idea how to stand in it. I want to tell you about something that happened during World War II because it reveals something about the human mind that most people never learn until it's too late. Psychiatrists studying prisoners in concentration camps noticed something deeply strange. Physical strength did not predict who survived the horror. Some of the strongest, most athletic men died within weeks. Some of the physically frail, sickly-looking men outlasted everyone. When researchers tried to understand why, they found the answer wasn't in the muscles, it was in the mind. The survivors were the ones who had cultivated an internal sense of meaning, an internal locus of control, something to hold on to that no external circumstance could touch. Viktor Frankl, one of those survivors, later wrote that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Read that again. Everything can be taken from you, your health, your money, your relationships, your home, your reputation, your future plans, everything except one thing, the way you choose to respond. And this is not a comforting platitude. This is a documented psychological finding from the most extreme human suffering ever recorded. The mind that had trained itself to find internal meaning survived conditions that broke the body of people twice as strong. So here's a question I want you to actually ask yourself, not just read and move past. If your comfortable life vanished tomorrow, if the job disappeared, the relationship ended, the plan collapsed, the safety net tore, what would be left inside you to stand on? Not what would you do? What would be left? Because most people have built their entire sense of stability on things that can be taken away in a single afternoon, and they have built almost nothing on the one thing that cannot. This is the part nobody wants to hear, so let me say it plainly. Mental toughness is not something you're born with. It's not a personality trait reserved for soldiers, athletes, and people who had hard childhoods. It is a skill, like a muscle, which means it can be trained, and it can also atrophy. And right now, in a world engineered for comfort, most people's mental toughness is atrophying in real time without them even noticing, the same way muscles waste away when you stop using them, slowly, silently, until one day you try to lift something heavy and your body simply fails you. The question is not whether adversity is coming. The question is whether, when it arrives, you will have spent your years before it building strength or building softness disguised as peace. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because most people have a completely wrong idea of what mental toughness even is. They think it means suppressing emotion, never crying, never admitting fear, grit your teeth, say, I'm fine, push through, don't feel anything. That is not mental toughness. That is emotional suppression. And emotional suppression is one of the most dangerous things a human mind can do to itself. Psychologists have shown repeatedly that suppressed emotion doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It resurfaces as anxiety, as illness, as sudden explosive anger, as numbness that quietly devours years of a person's life. The men who toughed it out and never processed their pain are often the ones who break the hardest decades later when the pressure finally finds a crack. Real mental toughness is almost the opposite of suppression. It is the capacity to feel the full weight of something terrible and still choose your next action deliberately, instead of being dragged around by the feeling like a leaf in a hurricane. It's not about not feeling fear. It's about acting with clarity while fear is present. It's not about not feeling grief. It's about carrying grief and still getting up, still showing up, still choosing meaning over collapse. There's a difference between numbness and strength, and almost everyone confuses the two. Numbness is the absence of feeling. Strength is the presence of feeling fully and still choosing your direction anyway. One is a wall, the other is a spine. And this is where I want to slow down, because I think you need to hear this next part more than anything else in this video. The people who seem the most mentally tough, the ones who stay calm under pressure, who don't fall apart when everything collapses around them, who make hard decisions with a clear head while everyone else is panicking. They were not born that way, almost without exception. If you study their lives, you find something specific in their past. Not trauma for the sake of trauma, but exposure, repeated, survived exposure to difficulty. At some point, early or late, they went through something hard and they came out the other side, and that experience taught their nervous system a lesson that no book, no motivational video, no advice from a parent could ever teach them. It taught them, I can survive this. And once your nervous system actually believes that at a cellular level, not just as an idea, but as lived proof, something shifts permanently in how you face the next hard thing. This is actually backed by neuroscience. There's a concept called stress inoculation. It works almost exactly like a vaccine. A vaccine doesn't work by protecting you from ever encountering the virus. It works by giving your body a small, controlled, survivable exposure to it so that when the real threat comes, your system already knows how to respond. Psychological resilience works the same way. People who face manageable doses of adversity and get through them develop a kind of internal antibody against panic. Their brain literally recalibrates what counts as a threat. Something that would send an untested person in a full nervous system meltdown barely registers to someone who has been inoculated by past difficulty. Which means the difficult things you've already survived in your life, the heartbreaks, the failures, the humiliations, the losses, were not just painful events to get through and forget. They were training sessions. Whether you realized it or not, your mind was in a gym the whole time. The only tragedy is if you went through all that pain and didn't let it build anything. If you just suffered and moved on without ever extracting the strength that suffering was trying to hand you. And this brings me to something most people get completely backwards about pain. They think the goal is to avoid it, to arrange life so carefully that discomfort never touches them. But a life engineered to avoid all discomfort is not a strong life. It's a fragile one dressed up to look safe, because the moment discomfort inevitably arrives, and it always does, that person has no calluses, no training, no prior evidence that they can handle hard things. And the shock of the difficulty is often more damaging than the difficulty itself. I want you to picture two people getting the same devastating news on the same day. Let's say both of them lose their job unexpectedly. Person one has spent years avoiding anything uncomfortable, always taking the easy path, always seeking comfort, never voluntarily doing anything hard. Person two has spent years doing hard things on purpose, pushing their body in ways that were uncomfortable, having difficult conversations they didn't want to have, sitting with failure instead of running from it, deliberately putting themselves in situations that required composure under pressure. Same news, same day. Completely different internal experience. Person one collapses, spirals, feels like their entire world has ended because they have no reference point for handling hardship. Person two feels the sting, absolutely, because they're human. But somewhere underneath the sting, there's a quiet, steady voice that says, I've done hard before. I'll figure this out. That voice isn't arrogance. It's evidence. It's the accumulated proof every difficult moment they didn't run from. That voice is the entire difference between breaking and bending. And here's the thing you need to understand. That voice is not something you either have or don't have. It is something you build moment by moment, choice by choice, through how you respond to the difficulties already in front of you right now, today, this week. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually answer honestly, not to me, but to yourself. When was the last time you voluntarily did something hard? Not something hard that was forced on you by circumstance, but something you chose on purpose because you knew it would strengthen you. When was the last time you had a conversation you were dreading instead of avoiding it? When was the last time you kept going on something physical after your mind told you to stop? When was the last time you sat with an uncomfortable emotion instead of numbing it with your phone, with food, with noise, with distraction? If you're struggling to remember, that's not a moral failure. It's just information. It's telling you something important about where your mental toughness currently stands. And more importantly, it's telling you exactly where the work needs to begin. Because here's what almost nobody tells you about mental toughness. It doesn't get built in the moment of crisis. Crisis only reveals what was already built beforehand. The soldier who stays calm under fire didn't become calm during the firefight. He became calm during 1,000 hours of training before it, training that simulated pressure so that when the real pressure came, his nervous system had already rehearsed the response. The surgeon who doesn't panic when something goes wrong mid-operation didn't develop that composure on the operating table. She developed it through years of deliberately facing high-stakes situations until her baseline for what counts as too much moved higher and higher. Crisis is not the training ground. Crisis is the exam. And most people are walking toward that exam having never once opened the book. This is the uncomfortable truth I need you to sit with before we go any further. You are, right now, either preparing for the storm or being lulled into a false sense of safety by the current calm. There is no neutral option. Every day you choose comfort over challenge, you are, in a very real sense, making yourself weaker for the day the challenge chooses you instead. But I don't want you to hear this and feel hopeless, because here's what makes this entire subject so quietly thrilling once you understand it. Unlike so many things in life that are outside your control, this one is almost entirely inside it. Your genetics, your childhood, the family you were born into, the traumas that already happened to you. None of that was your choice. But what you do from this point forward, how you train your response to difficulty, how you build your relationship with discomfort, that is completely, entirely yours to shape. And there is a specific method to this. Not vague advice like stay positive or believe in yourself, but an actual structured understanding of how mental toughness is built at the level of the brain, the nervous system, and daily behavior. There is a reason some people face devastation and rise within months, while others face something far smaller and never recover. It's not luck, it's not talent, it's a set of internal mechanisms. And once you understand what they are, you can start deliberately building them into yourself starting today, long before life ever forces your hand. But to understand how to build it, you first have to understand what it's actually made of. And that's where most people get it completely wrong, because the real foundation of mental toughness isn't what you think it is. And once I show you what it actually is, you'll start noticing it or the absence of it in every single person around you. So let's get into it. What is mental toughness actually made of at the root? Most people think it's confidence. It's not. Confidence is fragile because confidence is usually built on a track record of things going well. The moment things stop going well, confidence collapses because it was never built to survive failure in the first place. It was built to survive success. That's why you see people who seem supremely confident in good times completely disintegrate the first time life actually pushes back. Their confidence was a sandcastle beautiful at low tide, gone the moment the water rises. What mental toughness is actually built on is something psychologists call self-efficacy under uncertainty. It's not the belief that things will go well. It's the belief that you will be okay even if they don't. That's a completely different foundation. One is hope for a specific outcome. The other is trust in your own capacity to handle whatever outcome arrives. And that second thing, trust in your own capacity, is not something you can talk yourself into with affirmations in the mirror. It has to be earned through evidence. Real evidence gathered through real experience, stored not in your conscious mind, but somewhere deeper in the part of your nervous system that responds before your thoughts even catch up. This is why people who have been through genuine hardship and processed it properly often radiate a kind of quiet calm that younger, more sheltered people can sense but can't quite name. It's not that they've stopped caring. It's that their nervous system has been down this road before, in one form or another, and it knows the way back up. And here's where the neuroscience gets fascinating, because your brain doesn't actually distinguish between different types of threat the way you'd expect. There's a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain called the amygdala, and its job is to scan the environment constantly for danger and trigger the alarm system the moment it senses a threat. The problem is, the amygdala doesn't know the difference between a bear chasing you through a forest and an email from your boss that made your stomach drop. It fires the same ancient alarm, floods your body with the same cortisol and adrenaline, prepares you for the same fight or flight response, whether the danger is life-threatening or simply emotionally uncomfortable. This is the core malfunction at the center of modern human suffering. We are walking around with a threat detection system built for saber-toothed tigers, but we're using it to process rejection, criticism, financial stress, uncertainty, and social embarrassment. And because the alarm feels exactly the same regardless of the actual danger level, most people never learn to distinguish between a real emergency and an uncomfortable feeling. They treat both with the same level of panic. That is the untrained mind. It cannot tell the difference between actual danger and emotional discomfort, so it reacts to both as if its life depends on it. Mental toughness at the neurological level is the trained ability to interrupt that automatic alarm and ask a single simple question before reacting. Is this actually dangerous, or does it just feel uncomfortable? That pause, that half-second gap between stimulus and response, is where every ounce of your future strength lies. Viktor Frankl talked about this exact gap when he said between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. He wasn't speaking in metaphor. He was describing decades before modern neuroscience proved it. the exact mechanism by which the human mind can override its own ancient alarm system. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you if you think about it long enough. Every single time you let the alarm win, every time you react instantly and impulsively to discomfort instead of pausing, you are strengthening the neural pathway that says discomfort equals emergency. You're literally training your brain through repetition to treat minor stress like mortal danger. And every single time you catch yourself, pause, breathe, and choose a deliberate response instead of an automatic one, you're carving a different pathway, one that says I can tolerate this feeling without it controlling me. Over months and years, one of these pathways becomes your default operating system. Which one depends entirely on which one you practice more. This is why so many people describe anxiety as feeling like it's taken over their life. It's not a metaphor. It's a literal description of what happens when the panic pathway gets reinforced thousands of times through repeated automatic reaction until it becomes the brain's default response to almost everything. And this is also, I want you to notice, genuinely hopeful information because it means the opposite is equally true. Calm can become your default. Composure can become your default. Not because you were born lucky, but because you practiced the pause enough times that it became automatic instead of effortful. Let's talk about the Stoics again, because they understood this mechanism roughly 2,000 years before neuroscience had a name for it. Epictetus, who was born into slavery, whose leg was reportedly broken by his master, and who later became one of the most influential philosophers in history, taught something that sounds almost too simple to be profound. He said people are not disturbed by events, but by the opinions they hold about those events. Read that again. It's not what happens to you that breaks you. It's the story you immediately tell yourself about what happened. Two people can lose the exact same job on the exact same day, and one tells himself, my life is over, while the other tells himself, this is a painful redirection. Same event, different internal sentence, completely different trajectory afterward. This is not toxic positivity. This is not pretending bad things are secretly good. Epictetus was not saying don't feel pain. He was saying separate the event from your interpretation of the event, because the event is often outside your control, but the interpretation is always, without exception, yours to author. And the interpretation is what determines whether you spiral or whether you stabilize. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who buried multiple children, fought wars for most of his adult life, and dealt with betrayal from people closest to him, wrote himself private notes at night that we now call meditations, never intending for anyone else to read them. In one of the most quoted lines from that private journal, he wrote that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He wasn't performing wisdom for an audience. He was talking himself through real despair in the dark, alone, using this exact framework to keep himself functioning as a human being while carrying the weight of an empire and broken heart simultaneously. What both of these men understood, one a former slave and one the most powerful man in the world, was that mental toughness is not about controlling your circumstances. It's about controlling your relationship to your circumstances, and that distinction is the entire game. Now let's bring this into something more relatable, something closer to your actual life, because philosophy is beautiful, but it means nothing if it doesn't touch your Tuesday afternoon. Think about the last time you received criticism that stung. Maybe it was from a partner, a boss, a parent, a stranger online. Think about what actually happened inside you in that moment. There was the criticism itself, the raw words, and then almost instantly, faster than you could even notice it happening, your mind generated a story about what those words meant. Maybe the story was, I'm not good enough. Maybe it was they're trying to control me. Maybe it was I always mess everything up. That story, generated in a fraction of a second, is what actually caused the pain you felt. Not the words, the story about the words. This is why the exact same criticism can devastate one person and barely register with another. It's never really about the words. It's about which story the words get plugged into. And here's the unsettling part. Most people never even realize a story is being generated. They think the pain is a direct, unfiltered response to the event, when in reality it's a response to interpretation their mind manufactured in milliseconds based on old wounds, old beliefs, old patterns, most of which were formed before they were even old enough to consciously understand what was happening to them. Mentally tough people are not people who don't generate these stories. Everyone generates them. It's simply how the human brain processes experience. The difference is that mentally tough people have trained themselves to notice the story as a story rather than mistaking it for objective truth. They've developed what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thinking instead of being completely fused with it. This sounds abstract until you actually experience it, and then it changes everything, because the moment you can see a thought, instead of just being inside it, you gain the power to question it, challenge it, or replace it entirely. Let me give you something practical to hold on to here, because I don't want this to stay abstract. The next time something painful happens to you, I want you to try to catch the half-second gap between the event and your reaction. In that gap, ask yourself one question. What story am I telling myself right now, and is it the only possible story? Not is it true? Because in the heat of the moment, your mind will insist it's true with total conviction. Ask instead if it's the only possible interpretation. Almost always, you'll find there are at least 3 or 4 other equally plausible stories you could tell about the exact same event, and some of them are far less devastating than the one your mind automatically reached for. This single habit, practiced repeatedly over months, is one of the most powerful tools for building psychological resilience that exists, and it costs nothing, requires no equipment, and takes seconds to do. The reason most people never build this skill isn't because it's difficult, it's because nobody ever told them the gap exists in the first place. They go their entire lives believing their emotional reactions are simply automatic, inevitable, unchangeable facts of nature, when in reality, every single one of them is being generated by an interpretation they have far more control over than they've ever been taught to believe. Now, I want to take you somewhere darker for a moment, because I think you need to understand what happens when this skill is completely absent at scale in entire society. We are living through what many psychologists are now calling a resilience crisis, particularly among younger generations, and the data is honestly staggering. Rates of anxiety, depression, and reported inability to cope with basic life stressors have climbed dramatically over the past 2 decades, during the exact same period that physical safety, material comfort, and access to information have reached historic highs. Think about how strange that actually is. By almost every objective external measure, life has never been safer or more comfortable for more people. And yet, psychologically, more people report feeling unable to cope than ever before. That paradox should stop you in your tracks. Researchers studying this phenomenon point to something they call the overprotection paradox. The more society, and often parents specifically, try to shield children from every possible discomfort, disappointment, and failure, the more fragile those children become as adults, because they never got the small, manageable doses of adversity that build psychological antibodies. It's the exact same mechanism as the immune system. A child raised in a completely sterile environment, never exposed to germs, doesn't end up with a stronger immune system. They end up with a weaker one because the immune system needs exposure to develop properly. The psychological immune system works identically. Remove all struggle and you don't create a strong mind. You create a mind with no practice handling anything real. This is why some psychologists have started to argue, somewhat controversially, that a certain amount of struggle in childhood and young adulthood isn't just tolerable, it's necessary. Not abuse, not trauma, not neglect. Those are entirely different categories that cause real damage. But normal disappointment, losing a game and not getting a trophy anyway, failing a test and facing the actual consequence, being told no and having to sit with the discomfort instead of having it fixed instantly. These small, repeated exposures to manageable adversity are, it turns out, one of the most important things a developing mind can receive. And an entire generation raised without them is now entering adulthood and discovering, often in devastating ways, that the real world does not remove obstacles the way a well-meaning parent or a curated feed of only good news does. I say this not to blame anyone, because most parents who overprotect are doing it from love, not malice. I say this because if you recognize this pattern in your own upbringing, there is something powerful in that recognition. It means the fragility you might feel isn't a personal defect. It's the predictable result of an environment that never gave your nervous system the training it needed. And once you understand that, you also understand something liberating. The training can start now. It is never too late to begin exposing yourself deliberately and in manageable doses to the very things you've spent your life avoiding. But here's what makes this whole subject even more layered. And this is the part I really want you to sit with, because it connects everything we've talked about so far into something you can actually use. There is a specific difference between adversity that builds you and adversity that breaks you. And it is not about the severity of the adversity itself. It's about something else entirely, something almost nobody talks about. And understanding this difference is going to change the way you think about every hard thing you've ever survived and every hard thing that's still coming for you. Here's the difference, and once you see it, you will never unsee it in your own life or anyone else's. Adversity builds you when you feel some degree of agency inside it. Adversity breaks you when you feel completely powerless inside it. That's the entire hinge. It's not about how bad the event is objectively. It's about whether somewhere inside the suffering, you can locate even a small area where your choices still matter. This is why 2 soldiers can go through the same combat and come home with completely different psychological outcomes. This is why 2 people can go through the same divorce, the same diagnosis, the same financial collapse, and one becomes harder and wiser while the other never really recovers. It's not about the magnitude of the wound. It's about whether the person could find, or was helped to find, some thread of agency inside the wreckage, a decision they could still make, a response they could still choose, a meaning they could still construct. The moment a person locates the thread, even if it's tiny, even if it's just, I get to decide how I speak to myself about this, the adversity starts converting into strength instead of just damage. This is exactly what Viktor Frankl discovered in the camps, and it's exactly what modern trauma researchers have confirmed since. It's called the difference between traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth. And the deciding factor, more than almost anything else, is whether the person felt some form of agency during or immediately after the event. People who felt entirely helpless tend to develop lasting psychological injury. People who found even a sliver of control, even something as small as choosing to help another prisoner, choosing what to think about at night, choosing not to give their captors the satisfaction of seeing them break, often emerge from horror with something that looks strangely like strength. So here is something you can actually use starting today, the next time life hits you with something painful. Don't ask, why is this happening to me? That question has no useful answer and usually just deepens the feeling of helplessness. Instead, ask, what is still within my control right now? In this exact situation, it might be almost nothing. It might just be your breathing, your posture, the tone you use when you speak about it, the one phone call you choose to make next. It doesn't matter how small the area of control is. What matters is that you find it and you occupy it fully, because that single act of locating agency inside chaos is the psychological mechanism that prevents an event from becoming a life sentence. Now let's talk about something practical, because I don't want to leave you with only ideas. I want to leave you with a method, something you can start using this week, long before the next storm arrives. The first practice is deliberate discomfort. Not extreme suffering, not self-punishment, but small chosen doses of difficulty on a regular basis. Cold showers, hard conversations you've been avoiding, physical exercise that pushes past the point your mind wants to quit, fasting for a day, sitting in silence without your phone for an hour. None of these things matter because of the specific activity. They matter because they are rehearsals. Every time you choose discomfort voluntarily and complete it, you send a direct message to your nervous system. I can handle hard things on purpose, which means I can handle hard things when they're forced on me. This is stress inoculation done deliberately in small enough doses that you build capacity instead of being overwhelmed by it. The second practice is the pause. We already talked about the half-second gap between stimulus and response. You build this not through willpower in the heat of the moment, because willpower alone rarely wins against an activated nervous system. You build it through practices like meditation, breathwork, or even simple daily reflection, which train your brain outside of crisis to strengthen the exact neural circuitry responsible for interrupting automatic reaction. Studies on meditators show measurable changes in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for deliberate decision-making, and measurable dampening of amygdala reactivity, the alarm system we talked about earlier. You are not just calming down when you meditate. You are physically rewiring the machinery that determines whether you panic or pause. The third practice is narrative awareness, catching the story your mind tells about painful events and questioning whether it's the only possible story. Keep a journal if you need to. Write down the raw event, then write down the story you told yourself about it, then force yourself to write down 2 or 3 alternative stories that are equally plausible. This single habit, done consistently, slowly dismantles the illusion that your emotional reactions are simply objective facts about reality and replaces it with the far more accurate and far more empowering understanding that your reactions are interpretations, and interpretations can be examined, challenged, and changed. The fourth practice, and this is the one most people skip because it sounds too simple to matter, is finding agency in your current ordinary life before any crisis forces you to. Most people wait until disaster strikes to start asking, what can I control here? But if you build the habit now in your regular daily frustrations in traffic, in annoying coworkers, in minor disappointments, in the small stuff, you are pre-wiring the exact response you'll need when the stakes are unbearably high. You don't rise to the occasion in crisis. You fall to the level of your training, which means the way you handle a delayed flight or a rude comment today is quietly determining how you'll handle a genuine catastrophe tomorrow. The fifth practice is meaning making, and this might be the deepest one of all. Frankl's entire philosophy, born out of the worst suffering imaginable, rested on a single core idea: humans can endure almost any what if they have a strong enough why. This is not about pretending suffering is good. It's about refusing to let suffering be meaningless. When something devastating happens to you, one of the most powerful psychological acts you can perform is asking, not immediately, not while the wound is raw, but eventually what this experience could still be used for. Who could you help because you now understand this pain firsthand? What version of yourself could this forge? If you let it, this isn't about forced positivity. It's about refusing to let pain be wasted, because pain without meaning curdles into bitterness, but pain transformed into purpose becomes one of the most powerful forces human being can carry. Now, I want to bring this back to you specifically right now in this exact moment of your life. You don't know what's coming. Nobody does. That uncertainty is not something to fear. It's actually the entire reason this conversation matters. If you knew exactly what was coming and exactly when, you could prepare precisely for that one thing, but life doesn't work that way. It hits you sideways from directions you never anticipated, at times you never expected, in forms you never rehearsed for specifically, which means the only real preparation available to you is general strength, not strength for one particular storm, but strength as a way of being, so that whatever storm arrives, whatever shape it takes, you meet it with a nervous system that has already practiced staying steady, a mind that has already practiced finding agency, and a spirit that has already practiced converting pain into meaning. This is the quiet, unglamorous work that nobody applauds. Nobody sees you take the cold shower. Nobody sees you pause instead of react. Nobody sees you sit with the uncomfortable emotion instead of numbing it away. Nobody sees you question the catastrophic story your mind told you at 2 a.m. This work happens in private, in silence, with no audience and no immediate reward. And that is exactly why so few people do it. We are wired to invest in things that offer visible, immediate returns, and mental toughness offers neither. It offers something better, but something invisible until the day it isn't, until the day everything else falls away. And this is the only thing left standing between you and collapse. I think about that tree again, the one that grew in open wind instead of a sheltered greenhouse. It didn't grow that dense, resilient fiber because it wanted to. It grew that way because it had no choice, because the wind kept coming year after year, and the only options were adapt or break. But you are not a tree. You have something the tree doesn't have. You have the ability to choose the wind before it chooses you. You can walk toward discomfort on your own terms, in small, manageable doses, and build that same density of character, that same depth of root, without waiting for catastrophe to force it out of you. That is the real hidden invitation inside everything we've talked about today. You don't have to wait to be broken to become strong. You can choose starting today, starting with something small, to build the kind of mind that doesn't shatter when the real test finally arrives. Because it will arrive. That was never in question. The only question, the one that actually determines the shape of the rest of your life, is whether you'll meet it having trained or meet it for the very first time in the worst possible moment with no practice, no evidence, and no proof that you can survive what's in front of you. You already survived every difficult day you've lived through so far, every single one. That's not a coincidence and it's not luck. That's data. That's proof your nervous system can use if you let it. Instead of discarding those experiences as things you simply endured and want to forget, start collecting that evidence deliberately from this point forward. Start choosing small hardships on purpose. Start noticing the stories your mind tells you. Start hunting for agency in every difficult moment, no matter how small. Start asking what your pain could still be used for. This is how ordinary people become the ones who stay calm when everyone else is panicking, not because they were born different, but because quietly, privately, day after day, they chose to build the one thing life cannot take from them. If this reached you today, if something in this spoke to a part of you that's been waiting to hear it, do something with it. Don't just let it be a feeling that fades by tomorrow morning. Pick one practice from everything we talked about and start it this week. That's how transformation actually happens, not through inspiration alone, but through the small, repeated choices that follow it. If this video meant something to you, take a second to like it so more people who need to hear this can find it. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of thinking in your life, because this channel exists for exactly this purpose, to help you build the kind of inner strength that doesn't depend on circumstances being kind to you. Leave a comment and tell me what part of this hit you the hardest, or tell me about a moment in your life where you found strength you didn't know you had. I read those comments and they shape what we talk about next. And if you want to go deeper into this idea, go watch the next video, because there's a part of this conversation we haven't even touched yet, the part about what happens after you fall, and how the people who rise the highest are almost always the ones who fell the hardest first.